The auction hammer slammed down at $178,000, and the room erupted. Nathan Mercer stood frozen under the spotlight, grease still embedded beneath his fingernails, watching wealthy collectors applaud the car he'd resurrected from absolute ruin. But in the back of the gilded auction hall, one woman wasn't clapping. Victoria Hale's face had gone completely white. 3 months ago, she'd sold him that rotting garage for $1,000, while her executives literally laughed out loud. She'd called it worthless junk. Now that junk had just made him a fortune. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through downtown Detroit like a blade that morning, turning Nathan Mercer's breath into white clouds that hung in front of his face before disappearing into the gray January air. He stood with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his mechanic's jacket, the same jacket he'd worn for 6 years, the one with the oil stain on the left sleeve that never quite washed out no matter what his sister tried. The fabric smelled like engine degreaser and cold sweat. Across from him, separated by maybe 15 feet of cracked asphalt and dead weeds poking through the concrete, stood Victoria Hale. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. 29 years old, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back so tight it probably gave her headaches. Her coat probably cost more than Nathan's truck. Hell, her shoes probably cost more than his truck. She kept glancing at her phone, then at her watch, like this whole meeting was cutting into something more important. Behind her, 3 guys in suits huddled together, trying not to look cold. One of them kept snickering. "Mr. Mercer," Victoria said, her voice flat and professional in a way that made it clear she didn't really care about his answer. "I'm going to be direct with you. This property is a complete liability. The structure is compromised. The roof has multiple failures. There's probable asbestos, definitely lead paint, and the foundation has settling issues that would cost more to fix than the building is worth." Nathan didn't say anything. He just looked past her at the garage. It was a disaster. She wasn't wrong about that. The building sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Sheets of corrugated metal hung loose from the roof, clanging against each other whenever the wind picked up. Most of the windows were either broken or so filthy you couldn't see through them. Graffiti covered the lower half of the walls. Tags and spray-painted names from kids who'd been using the place as a hangout spot for probably a decade. The whole lot was maybe half an acre, tucked between an abandoned textile factory on one side and an empty field full of frozen mud and garbage on the other. The fence around the property had fallen down in so many places, it was basically decorative at this point. "The city's been on us about it for 2 years, Victoria continued. She wasn't even looking at the building anymore. She was looking at Nathan like he was wasting her time. "We need it gone. We're assembling parcels for a commercial development, and this is the last piece. Normally we'd just demolish it, but the environmental assessment came back complicated. Tearing it down would trigger remediation requirements that would delay everything." "So you want to sell it?" Nathan said. "I want it off our books." Victoria pulled out a folder from her bag and handed it to one of the suit guys, who walked it over to Nathan like he was delivering a subpoena. "We're prepared to offer you the entire property for $1,000. You sign an acknowledgement that you're purchasing it as is, no warranties, no representations. All environmental liability transfers to you. We file the deed, and it's your problem." The suit guy smirked when he handed Nathan the folder. Nathan caught it, saw the guy glance back at the others and shake his head slightly, like they were all in on some private joke. Nathan opened the folder. The contract was maybe 4 pages, dense legal text he'd have to read through carefully. But the property description matched. The price was typed right there, $1,000. "This is a serious offer?" Nathan asked. Victoria's expression didn't change. "Mr. Mercer, I don't make unserious offers. You have until 5 p.m. today to decide. After that, we're moving forward with demolition regardless of the costs. Can I look inside first?" For the first time, something flickered across Victoria's face. Surprise, maybe. Like the idea that someone would actually want to inspect this wreck before buying it hadn't occurred to her. "The structure isn't safe," she said. "I'll be careful." She checked her watch again, then nodded to one of the suits. "Marcus, get him the key." Marcus, the smirking one, walked over to a black Mercedes parked on the street and popped the trunk. He came back with a rusty padlock key hanging from a zip tie. He dropped it into Nathan's palm without making eye contact. "Good luck," Marcus said under his breath, barely hiding the laugh. Try not to get tetanus. Victoria was already walking back toward the car. 5 p.m., Mr. Mercer. Sign the papers and wire the money, or we're done here. Nathan watched them drive away. The Mercedes kicked up a spray of dirty slush as it pulled onto the street, and then they were gone. The whole meeting had lasted maybe 7 minutes. He stood there alone in the cold, looking at the garage. The wind rattled something metal inside the building. A loose pipe, maybe, or a sheet of roofing that had come free. It sounded hollow and empty. His phone buzzed. Text from his sister, Amy. Did you eat breakfast? Dylan's asking about you. Dylan. His son. 8 years old, probably sitting at Amy's kitchen table right now, eating cereal and watching cartoons before school. Nathan had left before sunrise because Victoria's assistant had called and said this was the only time she had available. He typed back, 8 already. Tell him I'll pick him up after school. Pizza tonight. The truth was, he'd skipped breakfast. He'd skipped a lot of meals lately, but Dylan didn't need to know that. Nathan pocketed his phone and walked toward the garage. The padlock was frozen. He had to breathe on it and wiggle the key for almost a minute before it finally gave way with a grinding click. The chain clattered against the door as he pulled it free. The main door was one of those old roll-up types, the kind you'd see on a warehouse. It resisted when he tried to lift it, the metal screeching so loud a couple of crows exploded out of a nearby tree. Nathan put his back into it and heaved upward. The door rose about 4 feet, then jammed. Good enough. He ducked under and stepped inside. The smell hit him immediately. Damp concrete, rust, rotting wood, and something sharp and chemical that might have been old paint thinner. His eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. Pale gray light filtered in through the broken windows and the gap under the door, throwing strange shadows across everything. The interior was massive. High ceilings, maybe 20 feet up, crisscrossed with exposed beams. The floor was stained concrete, cracked in places but mostly solid. Along the left wall, an old workbench ran the entire length, covered in tools so rusted they looked like they'd fused together. An ancient lift sat in the corner, hydraulic lines hanging loose like dead vines. And covering almost everything, old blue tarps. They were draped over shapes scattered throughout the space. Nathan counted 8 of them, maybe 9. Big shapes, rectangular, low to the ground. His pulse picked up. He walked over to the nearest tarp and grabbed a corner. The fabric was stiff with age and dust puffed into the air when he pulled. The tarp came away with a sound like tearing paper. Underneath was a car. Nathan froze. It was a Mustang. Late 60s, fastback body. Covered in dust so thick it looked gray, but underneath he could make out dark green paint. The chrome was pitted and dull, the tires completely flat and cracked, but the body was there. The lines. The shape. Jesus, Nathan whispered. He moved to the next tarp, pulled it back. Another Mustang. This one red, or it had been red once. The paint was faded, almost pink in places, and there was surface rust along the wheel wells, but the frame looked solid. Next tarp, a Camaro. First generation, 1969 maybe. Yellow, sitting on blocks because someone had removed the wheels at some point. Next, another Camaro, this one darker, burgundy or black, hard to tell under the grime. Nathan's hands were shaking now, not from cold, from something else entirely. He moved faster, pulling tarps back one after another. A Chevelle. A Corvette, C3 body style. Another Mustang, this one white with a black racing stripe barely visible under the dirt. And in the very back corner, under a tarp that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, something that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. A Pantera. De Tomaso Pantera. 1971 or 72 based on the body style. Italian. Rare as hell. Low and aggressive, the kind of car that looked fast even sitting still. The paint was almost completely gone in places, eaten away by moisture and time. The windshield had a crack running diagonally across it. The interior, what he could see through the dusty windows, looked like mice had nested in it for years. But it was there. It existed. In this forgotten garage that Victoria Hale and her executives had laughed about. Nathan pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. Every car from multiple angles. The VIN plates, where he could find them, the overall space, the workbench, the lift, the roof beams, checking for structural damage, for rot, for anything that would tell him if Victoria's assessment was accurate or just an excuse. The foundation looked good. Solid concrete, some cracks, but nothing catastrophic. The roof had problems, sure. There were water stains on the floor beneath a couple of obvious weak points, but the main beams were steel, and steel didn't rot. It would need work, real work. But it wasn't unsalvageable. Not even close. His phone buzzed again. Amy. You okay? You're being weird. He almost laughed. Weird. Yeah, you could say that. Nathan walked back outside into the daylight. The cold air felt sharp and clean after the stale darkness of the garage. He pulled the door back down, looped the chain through, clicked the padlock shut. Then he stood there for a long moment, just breathing, looking at the building. Victoria had offered him this property for $1,000 because she saw a problem, a liability. Something in the way of her real goal, which was assembling land for whatever commercial development she had planned. She'd looked at this place and seen obstacles, costs, delays, hassle. But Nathan had learned a long time ago that most people only see what's on the surface. His dad had taught him that. Frank Mercer, who'd run a small auto repair shop on the east side until lung cancer killed him when Nathan was 19. Frank used to say that half the skill in this business wasn't fixing what was broken. It was recognizing what was valuable before anyone else did. People throw away whole engines because they don't want to rebuild a carburetor, Frank had told him once, while they were elbow deep in a '68 Dodge Charger someone had abandoned at their shop. Lazy thinking. You put in the work, you find out what's really there. Nathan pulled out his phone and called his bank. A woman answered on the third ring, cheerful and professional. First Michigan Credit Union, this is Sandra. How can I help you? Hi, Sandra. This is Nathan Mercer. I need to check my account balance and set up a wire transfer. Sure thing, Mr. Mercer. Let me pull up your account. Can you verify your date of birth and the last four of your social? He gave her the information, then waited while she typed. Okay, you're showing a balance of $1,847.32 in checking. Would you like savings as well? No, that's fine. I need to wire $1,000 today. Can you walk me through that? There was a pause. That'll leave you with about $847, Mr. Mercer. Just want to make sure It's fine, Nathan said, probably a little harder than he meant to. It's for a property purchase. I'll send you the wiring instructions once I have them. All right, I'll set it up on our end. Just email us the details and we'll process it this afternoon. He thanked her and hung up. Then he stared at his phone for a while, at the pictures he'd taken inside the garage. 8 cars, classic American muscle, plus 1 Italian exotic. All forgotten, all sitting there waiting for someone to see them. If even half of them were restorable, if the frames were solid, if the VINs were clear, if he could track down parts, he was looking at potential value that made $1,000 sound like pocket change. But potential wasn't the same as money in hand. He knew that. Potential meant risk. It meant work. It meant gambling everything on his ability to do something most people would say was impossible. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it anyway. Mr. Mercer? A woman's voice, young, efficient. This is Rachel from Miss Hale's office. I'm calling to confirm whether you'll be moving forward with the purchase agreement. We need to know by 5 p.m., but Ms. Hale wanted me to check in and see if you had questions. Nathan looked back at the garage, at the sagging roofline and the graffiti and the broken windows. Yeah, he said. Tell her I'm buying it. I'll have the wire sent over in the next hour. There was a pause. He could almost hear the surprise in the silence. Oh, Rachel said. Okay, great. I'll send you the wiring instructions and the final contract via email. You'll need to sign and return by end of business today. I'll take care of it. Perfect. And Mr. Mercer, Ms. Hale asked me to remind you that all environmental liability transfers with the property, and I read the contract, Nathan said. It's fine. Send me the paperwork. He hung up before she could say anything else. For a moment, he just stood there in the cold, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. $847. That's what he'd have left in his checking account after this went through. His savings had maybe another $2,000, but that was supposed to be untouchable. Emergency money. Dylan money. The fund he'd been building since Sarah died, trying to make sure his kid would be okay if something happened to him. And he'd just agreed to buy a collapsing garage full of rusted-out cars with no guarantee any of it would ever be worth a damn thing. His phone buzzed. email from Rachel with the wire instructions and a PDF of the final contract. He skimmed it on his phone screen. Same terms as this morning. As is, no warranties. Buyer assumes all risk and liability. There was a clause about indemnification that basically said if the building fell down on somebody's head, it was Nathan's problem, not Victoria's. He signed it with his finger on the phone screen and emailed it back. Then he called his sister. Amy picked up immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." "You never call in the middle of the day unless something's wrong." "Is Dylan okay?" "Dylan's fine. I need to ask you something." He heard her moving around, probably stepping into another room where Dylan wouldn't hear. "What? Can you keep him for another couple nights? Just until the weekend. I'll pick him up Saturday morning." Long silence. Then, "Nathan, what did you do?" "I bought a property." "You what?" "A building. It's a garage out on the East Industrial Corridor. I'm going to fix it up." "With what money?" "I had enough." "Nathan, you barely have enough to pay rent. What the hell are you talking about?" He closed his eyes. This was the part he'd been dreading. Amy had been helping him with Dylan ever since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. She'd let him crash on her couch when he couldn't make rent. She'd bought Dylan school clothes when Nathan's paychecks went to medical bills. She'd never made him feel small about it, but he felt small anyway. "It's a good opportunity," he said quietly. "I know it sounds crazy, but I looked at the place and it's solid. There's stuff there I can work with. I just need some time to figure it out." Amy sighed, long and tired. "This is like the truck thing again, isn't it? When you bought that F-150, that wouldn't start?" "I got that truck running, sold it for 3 times what I paid. After 6 months and a blown transmission. Amy, please, I know what I'm doing." Another silence. He could hear Dylan laughing at something in the background, probably a cartoon. The sound made his chest ache. "Fine," Amy said eventually. "Dylan can stay here through the weekend. But Nathan, if this falls apart, if you lose money on this, you need to promise me you'll stop. No more projects, no more gambles. You'll get a regular job, something stable, and you'll focus on being a dad. Deal?" "Deal," Nathan said, even though the thought of giving up made him feel like he was drowning. "And you're coming to dinner Friday night, both of you. I'm making pot roast, and you're going to tell me everything about this garage situation." "Okay." "I'm serious, Nathan. I love you, but you're scaring me." "I know. I'm sorry. It's going to be okay." He hung up before she could argue more. The sun had climbed higher now, and the temperature had risen maybe 5 degrees. Still freezing, but less brutal. Nathan walked back to his truck, a beat-up 2005 Silverado with rust spots blooming on the wheel wells and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. He climbed in and sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the garage through the windshield. His phone buzzed one more time. Email notification. The wire had gone through. The property was his. Nathan Mercer, single father, part-time mechanic, owner of 1 collapsing garage and 8 forgotten cars. He started the truck and drove home. That night, after the sun went down and the temperature dropped into the teens, Nathan came back to the garage alone. He parked his truck on the street with the headlights pointed at the building, then grabbed his toolbox and a battery-powered work light from the bed. The padlock came off easier this time. He'd hit it with some WD-40 earlier in the day. The roll-up door screeched open, and he ducked inside. The darkness was total. His work light carved out a small bubble of pale LED glow, throwing harsh shadows across the tarps and the concrete floor. He set the light on the workbench and turned it to face the middle of the room. Then he got to work. He started with the first Mustang, the dark green fastback, pulled the tarp completely off and folded it to the side. The dust was incredible. He had to tie a bandana around his nose and mouth just to breathe. Up close, the car looked even worse than he'd thought. The paint was completely oxidized, chalky to the touch. The chrome trim had pits deep enough to catch his fingernail. All 4 tires were flat and cracked, the rubber basically disintegrated. But when he opened the door, it took some force. The hinges were frozen, and looked inside, his heart rate kicked up again. The interior was trashed. Mice had definitely been living in here. The upholstery was torn and stained, the dash cracked, the steering wheel covered in some kind of greenish mold. But the VIN plate on the dash was intact. Nathan pulled out his phone and Googled the number. 1967 Mustang Fastback, S code 390V8, 4-speed manual. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard through the bandana. S code cars were worth money. Real money. If the engine block matched the VIN, if the frame was solid, if he could prove the car's provenance, he was looking at a potential restoration value well into the 5 figures. Maybe 6, if he did it right. He moved to the next car. The red Mustang, pulled the tarp, checked the VIN. 1965 Mustang Coupe. i6 engine. Not as valuable as the Fastback, but still desirable. Classic first-generation body. Next car. The yellow Camaro. 1969, just like he'd guessed. SS package based on the trim. Big block engine. Sitting on blocks. But the frame rails looked straight when he crawled underneath with his light. He went through all of them like that, one by one, documenting everything. Taking pictures. Checking VINs, looking for rust, for frame damage, for anything that would tell him whether these cars were restorable or just scrap metal shaped like cars. By the time he got to the Pantera, it was past midnight. This was the one that scared him. Not scared, excited, terrified, both. The Pantera's tarp came off in pieces, the fabric literally rotting apart in his hands. Underneath, the car looked like something dragged out of a lake. The paint was almost completely gone. The rubber seals around the windows and doors had turned to black dust. When he opened the door, the hinge literally fell apart and the door sagged on one corner. But the body was there. Mid-engine layout, that gorgeous Italian wedge shape, pop-up headlights, wide rear haunches, the whole aggressive stance that made Panteras famous. Nathan pulled up the VIN information on his phone. 1971 De Tomaso Pantera, pre-L model, which meant early production. Rare, collectible. Values on these things were all over the place depending on condition, but even a rough example could go for 70 or 80,000. A proper restoration could hit 200 grand or more, if he could pull it off. And that was a big if. He sat down on the concrete floor next to the Pantera, back against the workbench, and just looked at all of it. 8 cars. Some of them savable with work. Some of them maybe too far gone. All of them representing more labor and money than he currently had. His phone buzzed. Text from Luke. You still alive? Luke Brennan. They'd worked together at Morrison's Auto Repair until the place shut down 6 months ago. Luke was a welder, certified TIG and MIG, could make 2 pieces of metal become 1 piece like it was magic. He'd gotten a job at a fabrication shop after Morrison's closed, and Nathan had been picking up side work wherever he could find it. Nathan typed back, "Yeah. You busy tomorrow?" "Depends. You paying?" "Eventually." "That's what you said about the carburetor rebuild I paid you." 3 weeks later, Nathan smiled despite himself. "I need you to look at something. It's important." "Fine. Where?" Nathan sent him the garage address. "That's a shithole neighborhood." "What's there?" "You'll see." 9 a.m. "Seriously? What is this?" "Just trust me." Luke sent back a middle finger emoji, then, "Fine. 9 a.m. But you're buying breakfast." Nathan pocketed his phone and stood up. His back ached from crawling around under cars. His hands were filthy, black with old grease and rust. He was exhausted. But standing there in that freezing garage, surrounded by forgotten machines, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind. Something harder, more solid. These cars existed. The building existed. The potential was real, tangible, sitting right here in front of him. Victoria Hale had sold him this property because she couldn't see past the surface damage. She'd looked at obstacles and decided they weren't worth overcoming. But Nathan's whole life had been about overcoming obstacles. Raising Dylan alone after Sarah's car accident. Working 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. Figuring out how to be a father when he barely felt like an adult himself. He'd learned that valuable things rarely looked valuable at first glance. That the difference between junk and treasure was usually just somebody willing to do the work nobody else wanted to do. Nathan turned off his work light and headed for the door. Outside, the city was dark and quiet. Just the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. He locked up the garage, climbed into his truck, and sat there for a minute with the engine running, heat slowly filling the cab. Tomorrow Luke would come see the cars. They'd make a plan. Figure out which ones to start with, what parts they'd need, how to tackle the restoration work on a budget that basically didn't exist. It was going to be brutal. He knew that. There would be setbacks, unexpected costs, moments where the whole thing felt impossible. But sitting there in the darkness, Nathan thought about his dad. About Frank Mercer rebuilding engines in a garage not much different from this one. Teaching a teenage Nathan that patience and precision could turn broken things into something beautiful. Lazy thinking, Frank used to say. That's what kills most projects. People see the work, and they quit before they start. Nathan put the truck in gear and drove home through the empty streets. He wasn't going to quit. Not before he started. Not ever. Luke showed up at 9:15 wearing a Carhartt jacket with burn holes in the sleeves and carrying 2 gas station coffees. He handed one to Nathan without a word, then stood there looking at the garage like it might collapse on him. "This is what you wanted to show me?" "Wait till you see inside," Nathan said. "Inside that?" Luke gestured at the building with his coffee cup. "Nathan, man, I've seen crack houses in better shape." "Just come look." Nathan unlocked the padlock and hauled the door up. It screeched even louder in the morning quiet, and Luke winced. "You oil that thing, and it won't sound like you're murdering a cat." "I'll add it to the list." They ducked inside. Nathan flicked on his work light, and the interior materialized out of the shadows. Luke stopped walking. His eyes went wide. "What the hell?" "Yeah," Nathan said. Luke moved toward the nearest car, the green Mustang Fastback, and just stared at it. Then he walked to the next one. And the next. He didn't say anything for a solid 2 minutes, just circled the space looking at each vehicle, occasionally crouching down to peer at something underneath or running his hand along a fender. Finally, he turned back to Nathan. "Where did these come from?" "They were here when I bought the place, came with the property." "You bought this property? When?" "Yesterday." Luke blinked. "Yesterday. You bought a condemned garage full of classic cars yesterday, and you're just now telling me." "I'm telling you now." "How much?" $1,000. Luke stared at him. Then he started laughing, this surprised bark of sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You're messing with me." "I'm not." $1,000 for all of this? The woman selling it thought the building was worthless. She didn't know about the cars. "Didn't know?" Luke looked around again, shaking his head. "Nathan, do you have any idea what you're sitting on here?" "Some idea. That's why I called you." Luke walked over to the Pantera, moving slower now, more careful. He crouched next to it and peered underneath, checking the frame rails. "This is a De Tomaso, Pre-L. You know what these go for?" "Ballpark. $100,000 minimum. More if you do it right." He stood up and pointed at the yellow Camaro. "That's a 69 SS, big block. 40,000 restored. Maybe more." He moved to the Fastback. S-Code Mustang? Jesus, Nathan. 70,000 easy if the numbers match. I checked the VINs. Most of them look legit. Most of them? Luke turned around, eyes bright. How many are we talking total? 8. Luke did some mental math, his lips moving slightly. Then he looked at Nathan with something between amazement and concern. If even half of these are restorable, you're looking at maybe 400,000 in potential value. Maybe more. Nathan felt his chest tighten. Hearing Luke say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. That's if I can restore them. Right. If. Luke walked back to the workbench and set his coffee down. Which brings us to the actual problem. You got any money left after buying this place? Not much. How much is not much? 800 in checking, maybe $2,000 in savings. Luke winced. That's not enough to restore 1 car, let alone 8. I know. So what's your plan? Nathan had been thinking about this all night, lying awake in his apartment after leaving the garage. We start with 1 car, the most restorable one, something we can flip relatively fast for cash. Use that money to fund the next restoration. Bootstrap it, Luke said. Yeah, that could work. Luke rubbed his jaw, thinking. But it's going to take time, and parts, and tools you probably don't have. Plus this building, Nathan, the roof is leaking. You got electrical in here? Nathan flipped a wall switch. Nothing happened. That's what I thought, Luke said. So you need to get power running, fix the roof, probably upgrade the lighting, get actual heat for the winter, all before you can really work on anything. I can do most of that myself. Sure, but materials cost money. Wire, breakers, roofing sheets, insulation. You're talking thousands just to make this space functional. Nathan knew Luke was right. He'd been trying not to think about all the infrastructure problems, focusing instead on the cars themselves. But you couldn't restore a car in a building that was falling apart around you. What if we worked nights, Nathan said. You keep your day job. I'll pick up towing shifts or whatever I can find. We use every spare hour on the restoration. Cut costs everywhere we can. Luke looked at him for a long moment. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Why? The question caught Nathan off guard. What do you mean, why? I mean, why this? Why now? You've got a kid, Nathan. You're barely keeping your head above water as it is. This is a massive risk. If it doesn't work out, it'll work out. You don't know that. I know I'll make it work out. Nathan heard the edge in his voice and tried to soften it. Look, I get it. This sounds crazy. But Luke, when am I going to get another chance like this? These cars exist. They're real. Someone left them here and forgot about them, and now they're mine. I can't just walk away from that. Luke picked up his coffee and took a long sip, still watching Nathan over the rim of the cup. You know what your problem is? You see potential everywhere. That's good for finding projects, but it's bad for knowing when to quit. I'm not quitting. I didn't say you should. I'm just saying you need to go into this with your eyes open. This isn't like flipping a truck. This is years of work. Years, Nathan, and it might not pay off. I know. They stood there in silence for a minute, the morning light starting to filter through the dirty windows and cut strange angles across the dusty floor. Finally, Luke sighed. Which car are we starting with? Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. You're in? I'm thinking about it. Show me what you've got. They spent the next 2 hours going through each vehicle systematically. Nathan had brought a notebook, and he wrote down everything as they inspected the cars. Luke crawled underneath each one, checking frame rails for rust and damage. They popped hoods, when the hoods would open, and assessed the engines. They opened trunks and doors, checked VINs against door jamb stickers, looked for mismatched panels or obvious collision damage. The news was mixed. 2 of the cars were probably too far gone. The white Mustang with the black stripe had severe frame rust. Someone had clearly driven it through Michigan winters with road salt eating away at the metal. The Corvette's fiberglass body had cracks everywhere, and the frame underneath was bent, probably from an accident years ago. But the others had potential. The green fastback was rough but solid. The frame was straight, the engine was seized but rebuildable, and most of the body panels were salvageable under the oxidation. The yellow Camaro needed a lot of work, but sitting on blocks had actually protected it from some of the moisture damage. The red '65 Mustang Coupe was in decent shape for its age, and the Pantera, despite looking like it had been abandoned at the bottom of a swimming pool, had good bones. The frame was intact. The engine, though completely frozen, was the original Ford Cleveland 5.8, and the body, underneath all the deterioration, was straight. Fastback first, Luke said, closing his notebook. It's the most valuable, and it's in good enough shape that we could actually finish it without going bankrupt. Get it running, get it looking decent, flip it to a collector. Use that money to fund the Camaro and the Pantera. How long? Nathan asked. To restore the fastback? Luke thought about it. Working nights and weekends? Assuming nothing goes catastrophically wrong? 6 months, maybe 8. That's a long time. That's fast for a full restoration. Most shops would take a year, year and a half, but they're not working on towing shift money and desperation. Nathan smiled despite himself. You calling me desperate? I'm calling you broke and ambitious. Different thing. They locked up the garage and stood outside in the cold. The building looked even worse in full daylight. The graffiti was more obvious, the structural damage more apparent. Nathan could see why Victoria had wanted it gone. You need a business license, Luke said. Can't legally operate a restoration shop without one. And insurance. You get hurt in there, or someone else gets hurt, you're personally liable unless you're properly covered. How much does that cost? Couple hundred for the license, maybe $500 a year for basic liability coverage. More if you want comprehensive. Nathan did the math in his head. Between the infrastructure repairs, the business setup costs, and parts for the first restoration, he was looking at easily $5,000 or $6,000. He had maybe $3,000 to his name. I'll figure it out, he said. Luke gave him a look. You keep saying that. Because I will. Nathan, I will, Luke. I don't know how yet, but I'll make it work. Luke shook his head, but he was smiling slightly. You're either the most stubborn person I know or the most delusional. Maybe both. Probably both. All right, I'll help you. But we do this smart, okay? No shortcuts that'll get us killed or sued. We fix the building first, roof, electrical, heat, then we tackle the fastback, one step at a time. Nathan stuck out his hand. Luke looked at it, then gripped it hard. One step at a time, Nathan agreed. Over the next 3 weeks, Nathan worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He picked up a towing contract with a company that ran night shifts, pulling in maybe $200 a week, hooking up broken-down cars and hauling them to impounds or repair shops. The hours were brutal, midnight to 6 a.m. most nights, but the money was consistent, and they didn't care if he looked exhausted. During the day when he wasn't sleeping or picking Dylan up from school, he worked on the garage. He started with the roof, bought cheap corrugated metal sheets from a salvage yard, and hauled them to the site in his truck bed, 2 or 3 at a time. Luke came by on his lunch breaks when he could, and together they climbed up on the questionable roof structure and replaced the worst sections. It was dangerous work. The old metal was slippery with frost, and more than once Nathan's foot went through a rotted section and he had to catch himself on a beam. You fall off this thing and die. I'm not explaining it to your sister, Luke said, hauling Nathan back from a particularly close call. Noted. They worked in silence mostly, the cold making conversation difficult. When a section was done, they'd climb down and stand there shivering, looking up at their progress. Patch by patch, the roof became less of a disaster. Electrical was harder. Nathan didn't have an electrician's license, but he knew enough to be dangerous, which was exactly the problem. He pulled wire, installed a new breaker panel with a permit he probably shouldn't have been able to get, and ran basic lighting throughout the garage. It wasn't pretty, but when he finally flipped the main breaker and the overhead fluorescents flickered to life, the whole space transformed. The cars looked different in real light. Worse in some ways, you could see every flaw, every patch of rust, every cracked seal and missing piece, but also more real. More like actual vehicles instead of shapes under tarps. Dylan came to visit on a Saturday. Amy drove him over and she stood in the doorway looking around with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. It's bigger than I thought, she said. Yeah. Still looks like a death trap. I fixed the roof. Most of it? Luke called from the back, where he was welding supports for the workbench. Sparks cascaded around him like orange rain. Dylan ran straight to the cars, eyes huge. Dad, are these yours? They are. All of them? All of them. Even the race car? He was pointing at the Pantera. That's not a race car, buddy. It's a Pantera, Italian sports car. It looks like a race car. Nathan smiled. Yeah, it kind of does. Dylan circled the Pantera slowly, taking in every detail despite the dust and damage. Are you going to fix it? Eventually. We're starting with that one. Nathan pointed at the green fastback. The Mustang. Can I help? Maybe when you're older. I'm 8. That's pretty old. Amy laughed from the doorway. That's ancient, Dylan. The kid was undeterred. I could hand you tools or clean stuff. I'm good at cleaning. Nathan looked at Amy, who shrugged. It's your shop. All right, Nathan said. You can help me clean the interior today, but you stay away from the sharp stuff, and you do exactly what I say. Deal? Deal! They spent the next 2 hours pulling trash out of the Mustang's interior. Decades of mouse nests, old leaves, chunks of deteriorated foam from the seats. Dylan worked with this intense focus, carefully scooping debris into garbage bags like he was excavating dinosaur bones. Why was all this stuff in here? He asked. The car sat for a long time. Animals moved in. Were they nice animals? Just mice. They were probably fine. Mom would have liked this, Dylan said quietly. Nathan froze, his hand halfway to a clump of rotted upholstery. Yeah? She liked old stuff. She always wanted to go to antique stores, remember? He did remember. Sarah had loved poking through thrift shops and estate sales, finding weird vintage things that she'd bring home and incorporate into their apartment. A 1940s lamp, mismatched china, a record player that barely worked. She'd called it treasure hunting. Your mom would have loved this garage, Nathan said, his voice rough. She would have wanted to rescue all these cars. Dylan nodded seriously. She was good at rescuing things. They worked in silence for a while after that. When Amy called that it was time to go, Dylan hugged Nathan hard around the waist. "This place is cool, Dad." "Thanks, buddy." "Are you going to live here?" The question surprised him. "No, I'm just working here. I still live at the apartment." "Oh, okay." Dylan looked around one more time. It'd be a cool place to live, though. After they left, Nathan stood there thinking about that. The garage was freezing, filthy, barely safe, but Dylan saw potential in it the same way Nathan did, like father, like son. Luke walked over, pulling off his welding gloves. "Kid's got your bug." "What bug?" "The fixing broken things bug. It's genetic, I think. Could be worse bugs to have. Could be better ones, too." They got back to work. By the end of the first month, the garage was functional. Not comfortable, it was still freezing, and the concrete floor made everything ache, but functional. They had light, power, a mostly weatherproof roof, and a workspace that didn't feel actively dangerous. Now came the hard part. They pulled the fastback out into the center of the garage and really started looking at what they were dealing with. The car needed everything: full engine rebuild, transmission work, suspension replacement, new brakes, new fuel system, new wiring harness. The body needed metalwork where rust had taken hold. The interior was completely shot and would need to be replaced. Paint would be last. No point making it pretty until it ran. Parts were the biggest problem. A lot of the original Mustang components were either discontinued or prohibitively expensive. They'd have to hunt salvage yards, online marketplaces, swap meets, find good used parts or affordable reproductions. Every dollar counted. Nathan made a spreadsheet on his laptop, tracking every expense. Gasket set for the engine, $180. Brake rotors, $90. Wiring harness, $250. The numbers added up so fast it made him nauseous. He took on more towing shifts, started skipping meals to save money. When his truck threw a check engine light, he ignored it because he couldn't afford the repair. Luke noticed, "You're running yourself into the ground." "I'm fine." "You fell asleep standing up yesterday." "I watched it happen." "I was just resting my eyes." "Nathan, you can't keep doing this. You're going to kill yourself or somebody else driving that tow truck on no sleep. What choice do I have? The parts don't get cheaper if I take a nap." Luke was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "I got some money saved. Not a lot, but enough to help with the next parts order. Call it an investment." Nathan looked at him. "I can't take your money." "You're not taking it. I'm investing it. When we flip this car, you pay me back plus 10%. Luke, it's not charity. It's business. You need capital. I got capital. This is how partnerships work." Nathan wanted to argue, but the truth was he needed the help. The math wasn't working otherwise. 10%, he said. "When we sell." "Deal." Luke's investment bought them the engine components they needed. They tore down the 390 V8 over the course of 2 weeks, laying out every piece on the workbench in careful order. The cylinder walls were scored from sitting so long, and the bearings were basically welded to the crankshaft from corrosion. "We're going to need machine work," Luke said, holding up the crank. "This needs to be turned down and rebalanced. The block needs to be bored. We can't do this here." "How much does machine work cost?" "Depends, but probably $500–600 minimum." Another expense. Nathan added it to the spreadsheet and watched his projected budget evaporate. They found a machine shop on the east side run by an old guy named Carl who'd been rebuilding engines since the 70s. He looked at the Mustang components spread across his shop counter and nodded slowly. "S-code car, huh? Don't see many of these anymore." "Can you save it?" Nathan asked. "I can save anything if you got the money." Carl quoted them $600 for the block work and crank. When Nathan hesitated, Carl added, "I can do $550 if you help with the teardown. Save me some labor hours." "I'll help." They spent 2 long Saturdays at Carl's shop, learning more about engine machining than Nathan had thought possible. Carl was gruff but patient, showing them how to properly measure clearances, how to check for cracks, how to balance rotating assemblies. "Most people rush this part," Carl said, running a micrometer over a cylinder wall. "They want the car done yesterday, but if you rush the foundation, nothing you build on top of it matters. Engine's the heart. You get the heart wrong, the whole thing dies." Nathan thought about that while they worked. The engine was the heart. Get it right, or nothing else mattered. When the machine work was done, They hauled the components back to the garage in boxes and started reassembly. This was the part Nathan loved, watching broken pieces become whole again. They installed new pistons, new rings, new bearings, torqued everything to spec. The engine came together slowly, piece by precise piece. 3 months after buying the garage, they dropped the rebuilt engine back into the Mustang's engine bay. It was a milestone, even though the car was still months from running. Seeing that motor sitting where it belonged felt like proof that this whole thing might actually work. "Looking good," Luke said, wiping his hands on a rag. Getting there. The next challenge was money again. They'd burned through Luke's investment and most of Nathan's towing income. The transmission needed a rebuild. The suspension components were expensive. The fuel system needed all new lines. Nathan's spreadsheet showed he was maybe $3,000 short of finishing the car. He started selling things. His nice tools, the ones he'd inherited from his dad, went to pawn shops. His laptop, an old guitar he never played anymore. Every extra thing in his apartment that had any value. It hurt, watching his life get smaller, but the car needed parts more than he needed possessions. Amy found out when she came over to his apartment and noticed it was half empty. "Where's your TV?" "Sold it." "Nathan, where's your couch?" "Sold that too. I didn't need it." "You're sitting on a lawn chair in your living room." "It's comfortable." She looked around at the bare apartment. No couch, no TV, no coffee table, just a lawn chair and a mattress on the floor in the bedroom. "This is insane. You can't live like this." "It's temporary. When the car sells..." "When?" "Nathan, it's been 3 months. How much longer is this going to take?" "However long it takes." "And what if it doesn't work? What if the car doesn't sell, or it sells for less than you think? You've given up everything for this." "Not everything. I still have Dylan." "Do you?" "Because he barely sees you anymore. You're working every night, sleeping 4 hours, then going to that garage. When's the last time you had dinner with him? When's the last time you went to one of his baseball games?" That hit him in the chest. His season hasn't started yet. It starts next week. Did you even know that? He hadn't. The realization made him feel hollow. Amy sat down on the lawn chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I love you. I'm helping you because I love you, but Nathan, you're scaring me. You look sick. You're losing weight. You're gambling everything on something that might not pay off, and I don't know what happens if it doesn't." "It will pay off." "You don't know that." "I have to believe it." They sat there in the empty apartment, not talking. Finally, Amy said, "Promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll come to Dylan's first game. Whatever's happening with the car, you'll stop for 2 hours and be there for him." Nathan nodded. "I promise." "And promise me that if this doesn't work, if 6 months from now you're still broke and broken down, you'll stop. You'll get a regular job. You'll focus on being a dad instead of chasing some impossible thing." He wanted to argue, wanted to say it wasn't impossible, but looking at Amy's tired face, he just said, "Okay, I promise." After she left, Nathan sat in the lawn chair in his empty living room and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But the next morning, he went back to the garage. The work continued, slowly, painfully. The Mustang transformed. The suspension went in. New brakes, new fuel system. They rebuilt the transmission in the corner of the garage, Luke teaching Nathan how to properly disassemble and reassemble the gearbox. It took them a week of nights, but when they were done, it shifted smooth as glass. Wiring was a nightmare. The old harness was rotted through in places, corroded in others. They spent 40 hours just running new wires, connecting everything according to the original diagrams Nathan found online. When they finally hooked up the battery and tested the system, half the lights didn't work. They troubleshot for another week before finding a bad ground that was killing the whole circuit. But slowly, so slowly, Nathan sometimes felt like he was moving backward. The car came together. 5 months after buying the garage, on a Thursday night in early June, they were finally ready to try starting it. Luke stood by the battery with jumper cables, ready to provide extra power if needed. Nathan sat in the driver's seat, his hand on the key. The interior still smelled like mouse nests despite all their cleaning, and the steering wheel was cracked, but the car felt alive in a way it hadn't before. "You ready?" Luke called. "Yeah." "Turn it over." Nathan turned the key. The starter motor cranked, once, twice, 3 times. The engine turned but didn't catch. "Give it gas." Luke said. Nathan pressed the accelerator slightly and turned the key again. The engine coughed, caught, died. Choke it. He pulled the choke and tried once more. This time the engine roared to life. The sound was enormous in the concrete garage. Rough and loud, the exhaust note echoing off the walls. The whole car shook with vibration. Smoke poured out the tailpipes, old carbon burning off after decades of sitting. But it was running. Nathan sat there with his foot on the gas, keeping the RPMs up, listening to that beautiful mechanical thunder. His hands were shaking. He realized he was grinning like an idiot. Luke appeared at the window, also grinning. He had to shout over the engine noise. "How's it sound?" "Like music." They let it run for 10 minutes, watching the temperature gauge, listening for any wrong noises. The engine smoothed out as it warmed up, the idle settling into a steady rumble. No knocks, no weird rattles, just a healthy V8 doing what it was built to do. When Nathan finally shut it off, the silence felt strange. "We did it," he said quietly. "We're not done yet," Luke said. "Still needs bodywork, paint, interior. But yeah, we did the hard part." They stood there in the garage looking at the Mustang. It was still rough, primer gray metal in places where they'd repaired rust, mismatched panels, no interior to speak of. But the heart was beating. The car lived. For the first time in months, Nathan felt like maybe this crazy gamble might actually work. The bodywork nearly broke them. Nathan had thought getting the engine running would be the hardest part, but he'd been wrong. Metalwork required skills neither of them had mastered, tools they couldn't afford, and patience that was running dangerously thin. The Fastback's quarter panels had rust holes the size of fists. The floor pans were Swiss cheese in places. Every time they peeled back one layer, they found more damage underneath. It was like surgery on a patient that kept getting sicker. "We need to cut this whole section out," Luke said, lying on his back under the car with a flashlight. "See this? The frame rail is compromised here. We patch over it. The car's not safe." "How much new metal are we talking? 2 feet, maybe 3. And we'll need to fabricate supports while we're replacing it." Nathan did the math. More material costs, more hours, more time they didn't have. They were 7 months into the project now, and Nathan's bank account was in the negative. He'd borrowed $500 from Amy, hated asking, hated the look on her face when she wrote the check, and maxed out a credit card he'd sworn he'd never use. The interest rate was criminal, but what choice did he have? Dylan's baseball season had come and gone. Nathan had made it to the first game like he'd promised, but missed the next 6. When the season ended, Dylan didn't even seem disappointed anymore, just resigned. That hurt worse than disappointment. "Dad's busy with his cars," Nathan overheard him tell Amy once, and the casual way he said it, like it was just a fact of life, made Nathan feel like he was drowning. But he kept working. Luke brought a buddy from his fabrication shop, a guy named Marcus who knew metal shaping. Marcus took one look at the Mustang and whistled low. "You're in deep, man." "Can you help?" Nathan asked. "I can try, but I'm expensive." "How expensive?" $50 an hour? Nathan's stomach dropped. At $50 an hour, even 10 hours of work would cost more than he had. "I can't afford that." Marcus shrugged. "Then you're going to have to learn fast. I'll show you the basics, but after that you're on your own." They spent a Sunday afternoon in the garage while Marcus demonstrated how to cut and weld patch panels, how to shape metal to match existing curves, how to make repairs that would actually hold instead of just looking good. He worked fast, his hands confident, and Nathan tried to absorb everything. "The key is patience," Marcus said, trimming a piece of sheet metal with tin snips. "Rush it, and you get waves in the panel. Take your time, work it gradually, and it'll come out clean." "How long did it take you to learn this?" "Years. But you don't have years, so you're going to have to compress the timeline. Practice on scrap first. Waste metal now, save the car later." After Marcus left, Nathan and Luke practiced on old fenders they'd pulled from the abandoned textile factory next door. They cut and welded and ground smooth over and over until their practice pieces started looking less like mangled garbage and more like actual automotive panels. Then they started on the Mustang for real. It was brutal. The first patch Nathan welded looked terrible, lumpy and uneven with burn-through holes where he'd held the torch too long. He had to grind it off and start over. The second attempt was better, but still wrong. The third was almost acceptable. "Good enough," Luke said, inspecting Nathan's work. Not great, but good enough. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. It's not supposed to be. We're not building a show car, we're building a driver. It needs to be solid and safe. Pretty is secondary. They worked through the summer heat, the garage turning into an oven. They rigged up fans that just moved hot air around. Nathan developed a permanent squint from welding without taking breaks. His hands blistered, healed, blistered again. The quarter panels took 3 weeks. The floor pans took another 2. Every repair revealed more problems. A cracked subframe mount, stress fractures in the shock towers, rust in places that shouldn't have rust. This car sat in water, Luke said, staring at corrosion along the trunk floor. Like serious water. Maybe it flooded at some point. Can we save it? Probably. But Nathan, I'm going to be real with you. We're putting way more money into this than we're going to get back. Nathan set down his grinder. What are you saying? I'm saying the numbers don't work anymore. We've spent, what, $8,000 on parts and materials, plus all the hours. Even if we sell this thing for $70,000, after we pay back my investment and cover your debts, you're barely breaking even. So what do I do? Quit? I'm not saying quit. I'm saying maybe we pivot. Finish this car as a roller, get it solid and running, but don't do the expensive cosmetic stuff. Sell it to someone who wants a project. Take whatever money we can get and move on to the next one. Nathan knew Luke was being practical. The smart play was to cut losses, get something back, start fresh. But the idea of selling an unfinished car, of giving up after all this work, made him physically ill. No, he said. We finish it right. Full restoration. With what money? I'll find it. Luke looked at him for a long moment. You're going to work yourself to death. Probably. But I'm finishing this car. Nathan picked up more towing shifts, working 7 nights a week now. He'd sleep from 8 a.m. to noon, pick up Dylan from school if Amy couldn't, then head to the garage until midnight. His body ran on coffee and adrenaline and something close to desperation. He stopped seeing friends, stopped answering calls that weren't about work or Dylan. His world shrank down to 3 locations: the garage, his truck, and the tow yard. One night around 2 a.m., he nodded off at a red light and woke up to someone honking behind him. His heart hammered against his ribs. If that light had been green, if there'd been cross traffic, he could have killed someone. He pulled over and sat there shaking, the tow truck idling, and seriously considered calling it quits. Just walking away from the whole thing. Getting a normal job, a normal life. Being a normal dad instead of this obsessed ghost who barely existed outside of his project. But then he thought about the Mustang sitting in the garage, so close to finished. Thought about those other cars still under tarps, waiting. Thought about Dylan saying, Dad's busy with his cars like it was just how things were. He put the truck in gear and kept driving. The bodywork finally finished in late September. The Mustang's shell was solid now. All metal replaced, all rust cut out, everything welded and ground smooth. It looked rough as hell, bare metal and primer everywhere. But the structure was right. Paint was next, and paint was expensive. Nathan got quotes from 3 shops. The cheapest was $4,500 for a quality job. The most expensive was almost $9,000. He didn't have either amount. We could paint it ourselves, Luke suggested. Neither of us knows how to paint. YouTube exists. People learn this stuff all the time. They watched probably 40 hours of video tutorials, bought the cheapest paint gun they could find, a gravity feed HVLP that cost $200 and looked like it might fall apart if you looked at it wrong. They practiced on scrap panels until they could lay down a coat that didn't look like orange peel. The paint itself was another problem. Quality automotive paint cost a fortune. They found a local supplier who'd sell them single-stage enamel. Old school stuff, not the fancy base coat-clear coat modern cars used, for about $800 with reducer and hardener. Nathan charged it to the credit card. He didn't look at the balance anymore. Couldn't afford to. They converted half of the garage into a makeshift paint booth, hanging plastic sheeting everywhere and rigging up a ventilation fan. It looked like something from a meth lab, but it would have to work. Prep took a week. Every surface had to be sanded perfectly smooth. Every tiny imperfection would show up magnified under paint. Nathan sanded until his arms felt like rubber, then kept sanding. They went through sandpaper like it was free, progressing from coarse to fine to ultrafine, until the primer felt like glass under their fingers. This is good enough, Luke said after the fourth day of sanding. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. We keep going like this. We'll never paint it. Nathan knew he was right. Perfectionism was just fear wearing a disguise. Fear that after all this work, the car wouldn't be good enough. That he wouldn't be good enough. They painted on a Sunday morning when the temperature was right and the humidity was low. Nathan wore a respirator that made him look like an insect and moved the gun in smooth, even strokes, trying to remember everything from the videos. Lay down the paint wet, but not too wet. Overlap each pass by 50%. Keep moving, never stop in one spot. The color was Highland green, the original shade for S-Code fastbacks. It went on darker than Nathan expected, almost black in the morning light filtering through the plastic sheeting. His first coat was terrible. Runs everywhere, thin spots, areas where the paint had pulled away from the primer. Luke didn't say anything, just helped him wet sand the mistakes and try again. The second coat was better. The third was almost good. By the fifth coat, the car actually looked like a car instead of a metal sculpture. They let it dry for 3 days, then pulled down the plastic and wheeled the Mustang back into the light. It wasn't perfect. Nathan could see imperfections everywhere if he looked close. Slight orange peel in places, a small run near the driver's door that he'd missed, areas where the metallic flake didn't lay quite even. But from 10 feet away, it looked stunning. The green was deep and rich, the body lines crisp, the chrome they'd polished gleaming against the fresh paint. It looked like something that belonged in a museum, not a converted garage that still smelled like rust and welding smoke. Luke walked around it slowly, not saying anything. Then he looked at Nathan and grinned. We did it. We actually did it. Nathan couldn't speak. His throat felt tight. 9 months of 16-hour days, of sacrificed meals and missed time with Dylan, of maxed credit cards and borrowed money, and literal blood from cut fingers and burnt hands. And here it was. Real. Finished. Almost finished. The interior was still destroyed. They needed seats, door panels, carpet, a headliner. The dashboard was cracked beyond saving. The gauges worked but looked aged. All of it needed replacing. Nathan found a restoration supplier online that sold reproduction interiors. A complete kit for a 67 Fastback ran $3,200. He didn't have it. He called Amy. She picked up on the fourth ring. It's late, Nathan. Everything okay? I need to ask you something. He heard how tired his own voice sounded. And you can say no. I'll understand if you say no. What is it? I need to borrow $3,000. Silence. Long enough that Nathan thought she might have hung up. Amy? You already owe me $500. I know, and I'll pay that back. I'll pay all of it back. But I'm so close to finishing this car, like weeks away. I just need the interior kit, and then I can sell it. How long have you been saying that? How many times have you told me you're almost done? This time, I mean it. The car's painted. The engine runs. I just need... You need to stop, Nathan. Her voice wasn't angry. Worse, it was sad. You need to step back and look at what this is doing to you. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. Dylan told me he can't remember the last time you two just hung out without you falling asleep on the couch. It's temporary. When this sells... And what if it doesn't? What if you finish this car and it doesn't sell for what you think it will? What if you've wasted a year of your life and tens of thousands of dollars on something that was never going to work? Nathan closed his eyes. Standing in the dark garage, phone pressed to his ear, he felt the weight of the last 9 months crushing down on him. Then I've wasted a year, but I have to finish it. I can't give up now. Amy sighed. I can't loan you more money. I'm sorry. I don't have it to give, and even if I did, I think I'd be enabling something that's hurting you. Okay. Nathan, no, you're right. I shouldn't have asked. I'll figure something else out. Please talk to someone. A therapist or a financial counselor or someone who can help you see this clearly. I'll think about it. He hung up and sat down on the cold concrete floor, back against the Mustang's front tire. The car looked beautiful in the dim overhead lights. All that work, all that sacrifice, and he was $3,000 short of the finish line. His phone buzzed. Text from Luke. You good? Haven't heard from you in a couple of days. Nathan typed back. Need to find $3,000 for interior. Ideas? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, might know a guy. Call you tomorrow. The next day, Luke showed up with someone Nathan had never met. Mid-50s, gray hair, wearing a polo shirt with Classic Restorations ink embroidered on it. He drove a new F-150 and carried himself like someone who was used to being listened to. "Nathan, this is Robert Chen," Luke said. "He runs a restoration shop in Ann Arbor. Builds high-end stuff for collectors." Robert shook Nathan's hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. "Luke tells me you've been working on something interesting." They showed him the Mustang. Robert walked around it twice, not touching, just looking. He crouched down to examine the panel gaps, peered at the paint under different angles of light, popped the hood, and spent 5 minutes looking at the engine, checking fittings, tracing wiring. Finally, he straightened up. "Who did the work?" "We did," Nathan said. "Me and Luke." "The metal fabrication." "Us." "Paint?" "Also us." Robert looked at him with something that might have been respect. "You taught yourself all this." "We had some help, but mostly, yeah. The bodywork is cleaner than I expected. Paint has some flaws, but nothing terrible for a first attempt. Engine bay is neat." He walked to the back of the car and crouched again, looking at the undercarriage. "Frame repairs look solid. You know what you're doing with a welder?" "Luke does." "I'm learning." Robert stood and brushed off his hands. "What are you planning to do with it?" "Finish the interior and sell it, fund the next restoration." "You have other cars?" Nathan gestured at the tarps. 7 more, different conditions." Robert walked over and lifted a tarp. The Pantera. He froze. "Is this what I think it is?" 71 Pantera, pre-L. Condition? Rough, but complete. Robert pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. Of the Pantera, of the Camaro, of the other cars. Then he turned to Nathan. "Can I make you an offer?" "On which car?" "The Mustang, as it sits right now." Nathan's pulse kicked up. "It's not finished." "I understand, but I have a client who's looking for exactly this. An S-Code fastback, Highland Green, 4-speed car. He wants to finish the restoration himself. Wants the satisfaction of doing the interior work, making it his own. What you've got here is perfect for him." "How much?" Luke asked. Robert thought for a moment. 65,000. The number hung in the air. Nathan's brain stuttered trying to process it. $65,000. For a car that still needed $3,000 worth of interior work. "I know it's not finished," Robert continued, "but you've done the hard parts. The mechanical work is excellent. The body and paint are solid. My client would be getting a turnkey project. He could finish it in a couple months and have a car worth 90, maybe 100,000 when it's done. Why not just finish it ourselves?" Nathan heard himself say. "If it's worth that much finished. Because my client will pay me 75,000 for this car once I deliver it to him. I'm offering you 65. That's 10 grand for me, essentially brokering the deal. You get paid now, today, and you can move on to your next project. Or you can spend 3 more months finishing it yourself. Hope you find a buyer willing to pay full market value and maybe make another 10 or 15 grand. Your call." Nathan looked at Luke, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "Can you give us a minute?" Nathan asked. "Take your time." Robert walked outside, pulling out his phone. As soon as he was gone, Luke grabbed Nathan's arm. "Dude, $65,000. "I know. That's insane. That's more than we thought we'd get even finished. But if we finish it, we might get more. Or we might not. And it'll take months. Nathan, this is a sure thing. Money in hand right now, and you can pay off your debts and start on the next car without all the stress." Nathan walked over to the Mustang and put his hand on the fender. The paint was smooth and cool under his palm. 9 months of his life lived in this car. Every late night, every skipped meal, every hour away from Dylan, all of it was built into this machine. And now someone wanted to pay him $65,000 for it. "I'll take it," he said. Robert came back inside and they shook hands. He made a call to his bank, arranged a wire transfer, and had Nathan sign some paperwork right there on the workbench. The whole transaction took maybe 20 minutes. "I'll have a flatbed here tomorrow to pick it up," Robert said. "And Nathan, if you're serious about doing this professionally, call me. I'm always looking for good fabricators, people who can do quality work on a budget. We could probably send some overflow projects your way." After Robert left, Nathan and Luke just stood there looking at the empty space where the Mustang had been. "We did it," Luke said quietly. "We actually pulled it off." Nathan's phone buzzed. Bank notification. Wire transfer received, $65,000. He stared at the number on his screen. More money than he'd ever had in his life. More than he'd made in 2 years of towing, sitting right there in his account. "First thing you do is pay off that credit card," Luke said, "before the interest eats you alive." "Yeah." "Second thing is you pay me back, with the 10%. Third thing is I give Amy back her $500. Fourth thing," Luke said, "you take Dylan out for a nice dinner, somewhere he gets to pick, and you spend the whole time not thinking about cars." Nathan looked at his friend. "Thank you for all of this. I couldn't have done it without you." "I know, but you would have tried anyway, and you would have killed yourself." Luke clapped him on the shoulder. "So what's next? The Pantera?" "Not yet. That's going to take years and money I don't have. I'm thinking the red Mustang Coupe. It's in better shape than the Fastback was. We could probably flip it in 6 months." "6 months," Luke repeated. "And then?" "The Camaro. Then the Pantera. Then whatever comes after that." "You're going to build this into a real business, aren't you?" Nathan looked around the garage, at the remaining cars under their tarps, at the tools and equipment they'd accumulated, at the space that had transformed from a collapsing wreck into something functional, something with potential. "Yeah," he said, "I think I am." That night, Nathan took Dylan to dinner at a steakhouse the kid had been talking about for months. They got a booth by the window, and Dylan ordered a burger that was bigger than his head. "So the car sold?" Dylan asked, drowning his fries in ketchup. "It did." "For how much?" "A lot. Enough to work on the next one." Dylan nodded, processing this. "Are you done being so busy now?" The question hurt. "I'm going to try to be around more. I know I've been gone a lot." "It's okay. Aunt Amy says you're building something important." "What do you think?" Dylan shrugged. "I think the cars are cool, but I miss you." Nathan felt something crack in his chest. "I miss you too, buddy. And I'm sorry. I should have been around more. Are you going to fix the race car next, the Pantera?" "Eventually. That one's going to take a while." "Can I help when you do?" Nathan reached across the table and ruffled Dylan's hair. "Yeah, you can definitely help." They ate slowly, talking about school and baseball and a video game Dylan wanted. Normal things. Easy things. For 2 hours, Nathan didn't think about cars or money or what came next. He just sat with his kid and remembered what mattered. On the way home, Dylan fell asleep in the passenger seat, and Nathan drove carefully through the night streets, one hand on the wheel and one on his son's shoulder. The next morning, Nathan went to the bank and paid off the credit card. $8,000 gone in an instant, but the relief was immediate. Then he paid Luke $1,200, his original investment plus 10%. Gave Amy her $500 back in cash, which she tried to refuse until Nathan insisted. That left him with about $55,000. He put $40,000 in a savings account he made himself promise not to touch except for emergencies. The remaining $15,000 would fund the next restoration. Better budget this time. Smarter purchasing. Less desperation. Robert's flatbed came and hauled the Mustang away. Nathan watched it disappear down the street, feeling strange. Pride and loss mixed together. That car had almost destroyed him, but it had also proved something, that he could do this, that the gamble wasn't completely insane. A week later, an article appeared in a local car enthusiast blog. Someone had spotted the Mustang at Robert's shop and posted photos. The write-up was short but complimentary. Beautiful S-Code Fastback undergoing final restoration at Classic Restorations, Inc. Word is this started as a barn find, completely disassembled, and was brought back by an unknown shop in Detroit. Excellent metalwork and paint for a budget build. Luke texted him the link. "You're famous." "Unknown shop in Detroit." "That's us." "We need a name. Can't be unknown forever." Nathan thought about it. What would he call this place? This garage full of forgotten cars and impossible projects. "Mercer Restoration and Auto Works," he typed back. "That's not bad. Professional. I like it." Nathan registered the business name that afternoon, filed for an LLC, got the proper licenses, set up a basic website with photos of the Mustang restoration. Before and after shots that looked almost unbelievable. The website went live on a Tuesday. By Friday, he had 3 emails from people asking about restoration services. By the end of the month, he had a waiting list. The second restoration, the red 65 Mustang Coupe, went faster than the first. Nathan and Luke had learned from their mistakes. They knew which suppliers to use, which corners could be cut safely and which couldn't, how to budget time and money more effectively. The coupe didn't need as much metal work. The frame was solid. They focused on making it clean and reliable rather than perfect. Rebuilt the engine, fixed the suspension, got the body straight, and painted it in its original poppy red. Did the interior themselves using YouTube tutorials and patience. 6 months after starting, they sold it to a collector in Ohio for $48,000. The profits went into better equipment, a real paint booth, not plastic sheeting, an actual ventilated enclosure, a frame rack for doing structural work, better welders, better tools, better everything. Word spread. The blog post about the Fastback led to a feature in a regional classic car magazine. That led to more customers. People started bringing Nathan their projects, cars they'd started and couldn't finish, barn finds they didn't have the skills to restore, investment pieces that needed professional work. Mercer Restoration and Auto Works became real. Nathan hired 2 guys part-time, both young mechanics trying to break into the restoration world. The garage that had been just him and Luke now had a crew. They worked on 3 cars simultaneously, customer projects that paid the bills, while Nathan slowly worked on the remaining cars he'd found in the garage. The yellow Camaro took 8 months. When it sold at a regional auction for $72,000, Nathan realized he'd crossed some invisible threshold. This wasn't a gamble anymore. It was a business, an actual, functioning business. He moved out of his apartment and rented a small house closer to Dylan's school. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard, and Dylan got his own room. They painted it together one weekend, Dylan picking a blue that was almost too bright, but Nathan didn't care. "This is ours?" Dylan asked, standing in his empty room. "It's ours." "Not Aunt Amy's house?" "Nope, just you and me." Dylan ran through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing, and Nathan stood there thinking about how far they'd come from that freezing garage and that $1,000 gamble. But there was still one car left. The car that scared him. The car he'd been avoiding. The Pantera. It sat under its tarp in the back corner of the garage, waiting. Nathan walked past it every day and felt its presence like gravity. The most valuable car, the most difficult restoration, the biggest risk. Luke caught him staring at it one afternoon. "You ready?" "I don't know." "It's been almost 2 years. The business is solid. We've got the skills now. We've got the money. What are we waiting for?" Nathan pulled the tarp back. The Pantera looked even worse than he remembered. Paint completely gone in places. Interior demolished. The engine, he knew without checking, would be seized solid. This car would take everything they'd learned and demand more. "It's going to cost a fortune," Nathan said. "Probably, but it's also going to be worth a fortune when it's done. And Nathan, this is the one. This is the car that makes your reputation. You restore this thing right, do it perfect, nobody's going to call you unknown anymore." Nathan thought about that. About building something that mattered. Not just fixing broken cars, but creating something excellent. Something that proved he belonged in this world. "All right," he said, "let's do it." They pulled the Pantera out into the center of the garage, and Nathan started taking photographs from every angle, documenting everything. This restoration would be different from the others. More careful, more precise. No shortcuts. This was the car that would change everything. He just didn't know how much. The Pantera became an obsession. Nathan had thought he understood what restoration meant after the Mustangs and the Camaro, but the Italian car operated on a different level entirely. Everything about it was complicated. The mid-engine layout meant accessing components required disassembling half the car. Parts weren't just expensive, they were impossible to find. And the car's reputation as a temperamental exotic meant every system needed to be perfect or it wouldn't work at all. They started with disassembly, which took 3 weeks. Every bolt removed was documented, photographed, labeled. Nathan filled 2 notebooks with diagrams and notes. The engine came out in pieces. The Ford 351 Cleveland 5.8 was seized so badly they had to soak it in penetrating oil for a week before the crankshaft would even budge. "This is going to take years." Luke said, looking at the completely dismantled car spread across the garage floor. And I mean actual years, not your optimistic version of years. I know. And it's going to cost 6 figures, minimum. I know that too. Just making sure we're on the same page. Nathan ran the numbers constantly. He had maybe $60,000 in the business account after paying bills and salaries. A proper Pantera restoration could easily eat twice that. He'd need to keep taking customer jobs, keep the cash flowing, and somehow find time to work on this car that demanded perfection. The first major expense was the engine. Carl's machine shop could handle the block work, but the Cleveland's heads were cracked. Finding replacements took Nathan 2 months of calling suppliers, scouring online forums, and finally tracking down a specialist in California who had a rebuilt pair for $4,500. That's just the heads, Nathan told Dylan one night over dinner. They were eating takeout Chinese at the small kitchen table in their house. Not the complete engine, just the cylinder heads. That's a lot of money for part of an engine, Dylan said, expertly using chopsticks now at 10 years old. It is, but it's what the car needs. What if you can't sell it for enough money after? The question was more perceptive than Nathan wanted to admit. Then I'll have made a very expensive mistake. Dylan thought about this while chewing his fried rice. But you don't think you will? Make a mistake, I mean. I'm trying really hard not to. That's different than being sure, though. Nathan smiled despite himself. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You're just noticing now because you're not falling asleep during dinner anymore. That landed harder than Dylan probably meant it to. Nathan had been better about being present. The business was stable enough now that he could keep regular hours, pick Dylan up from school most days, make it to his baseball games. But the guilt from those early years still sat in his chest like a stone. I'm sorry about back then, Nathan said. When I was working all the time, I know I missed a lot. Dylan shrugged, but not dismissively, more like he was genuinely considering it. It's okay. Aunt Amy explained that you were trying to build something, and you did. The garage is really cool now. It is pretty cool. Are you going to let me work on the Pantera? What do you want to do? I don't know, whatever you'll let me do. Hand you tools, clean parts, take pictures. I'm good at pictures. Nathan thought about the hundreds of hours ahead, the meticulous work, the need for absolute precision. Then he thought about his own dad, Frank, letting a teenage Nathan into his shop, teaching him that valuable things were worth the effort. Yeah, Nathan said, you can help. Dylan grinned, and Nathan filed that expression away in his memory. His kid, happy about the prospect of spending time in a garage covered in grease and metal shavings. Maybe the apple really didn't fall far. The Pantera's body was worse than the engine. Rust had eaten through both rocker panels. The floor pans were completely gone in places. The door skins needed replacing. And because it was an Italian car with limited production numbers, reproduction panels didn't exist. Everything had to be fabricated by hand. Luke brought in Marcus again, the metal shaping specialist. Marcus walked around the stripped Pantera shell and whistled the same low note he'd made when he first saw the Mustang. You like punishment, don't you? Marcus said. Apparently, Nathan replied. This is going to require proper English wheel work. You can't just cut and weld this stuff. The panels are compound curves. You're going to need to form them from flat sheet. Can you teach us? I can try, but Nathan, this is expert-level fabrication. The kind of stuff that takes craftsmen decades to master. You're going to make a lot of scrap before you make usable parts. How much would you charge to do it yourself? Marcus did some mental math. For all the body panels this car needs, $25,000, $30,000, and that's a friend rate. Nathan felt his stomach drop, but he kept his expression neutral. What if we supply the labor and you supervise? Charge us for your expertise, but not the actual hammer work. That could work. I'd still need to be here a lot, though. This isn't something you can learn from a couple YouTube videos. They worked out a deal. Marcus would come in 3 days a week for 4 hours each time. $1,500 a week, which made Nathan's accountant's side cringe. But it was half what having Marcus do the work himself would cost. The body fabrication took 6 months. 6 months of heating metal, hammering it over forms, checking and rechecking curves against templates. Nathan made mistakes constantly, panels that looked perfect until you held them up to the car and realized they were off by a 1/4 inch, welds that looked solid until you stressed them and they cracked. Metal he'd spent 40 hours shaping only to warp it in the final welding stage. "You're learning the expensive way," Marcus said, watching Nathan grind off a botched weld for the third time. "Most people quit before they get good at this." "I don't have that option." "Why not? You could sell this car as parts, probably get 30, 40 grand for the drivetrain and interior components. Walk away, focus on easier projects." Nathan set down his grinder and looked at the Pantera's bare shell. "Because this is the car. This is the one that proves I can do more than just restore Mustangs. Anyone can restore a Mustang if they try hard enough, but this," he gestured at the Italian exotic, "this is the one that matters." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that. Just make sure the thing you're proving is worth what it's costing you." The cost kept climbing. Original Pantera trim pieces were nearly impossible to find. Nathan spent weeks tracking down a set of correct taillight lenses, finally locating them in Germany for $1,800. The windshield was discontinued. He had to have one custom made for $3 grand. The interior alone was going to run $25,000 for correct materials and professional upholstery work. He took on more customer jobs to fund it. The garage now had 5 employees and was running 3 projects simultaneously at any given time. Nathan had become good at estimating restoration costs, at managing timelines, at keeping customers happy when unexpected problems arose. The business was making money, real money, but the Pantera ate it as fast as it came in. Luke started asking questions about the budget around month 8. "We've put in $90,000 so far," he said, reviewing the spreadsheet Nathan had been maintaining. "That's not including your labor or mine, just materials and outside services." "I know. And we're maybe halfway done. The engine still needs assembly. The paint is going to be 10 grand minimum for a show quality job. The interior is another 25. We're looking at 150, maybe 160 total." "What's your point?" "My point is that Panteras in perfect condition sell for around 200,000. You're going to have 160 invested, minimum. That's a pretty thin margin for this much risk." Nathan had run these same numbers in his head 100 times. "The right buyer will pay more. A properly documented, perfect restoration of a pre-L Pantera? That's a $250,000 car, maybe 300. If you find the right buyer, what if you don't? Then I break even and I've built something incredible anyway." Luke closed the laptop. "That's not a business model, that's pride." "Maybe, but I'm doing it anyway." They worked in silence for a while after that. Nathan knew Luke was right. This was pride as much as business sense. But wasn't that the point? To build something that mattered, something that showed what he was capable of? The money was important, but it wasn't everything. The engine assembly took 3 months. Every component was either rebuilt or replaced with new. Nathan learned things about engine building he'd never known existed. Proper ring gap measurements. Bearing clearance tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The precise sequence for torquing head bolts to prevent warping. Carl supervised the final assembly at his shop, checking Nathan's work at every stage. When they finally bolted on the intake manifold and dropped the completed engine onto a stand, Carl stepped back and nodded. "That's a proper build. Better than the factory did it originally." "Will it run?" "It'll run. Whether it runs well depends on 100 other things. But yeah, this engine will start." They installed it in the Pantera on a cold November morning, 2 years and 3 months after Nathan had first pulled back the tarp. The engine slid into the mid-mount position like it belonged there, which Nathan supposed it did. Luke connected the transmission while Nathan routed fuel lines and electrical connections. Dylan came by after school and watched them work. He'd grown over the past 2 years, almost to Nathan's shoulder now, and had developed his dad's habit of watching mechanical work with intense focus. "When are you going to start it?" Dylan asked. "Couple of weeks. We need to finish all the systems first. Cooling, fuel, exhaust. Can't just drop in an engine and turn the key." "But when you do start it, can I be here?" "Definitely." The first start attempt was a disaster. The engine cranked but wouldn't fire. Nathan checked spark, checked fuel delivery, checked timing. Everything looked right, but the car refused to cooperate. They spent 2 days troubleshooting before Luke found the problem: a single crimped fuel line that was blocking flow to the rear cylinders. "Italian engineering," Luke muttered, fixing the crimp. "Everything's harder than it needs to be." The second start attempt worked. The Cleveland 5.8 coughed, caught, and roared to life with a sound that was distinctly different from the American muscle cars Nathan was used to. Sharper, angrier, more aggressive. The Pantera shook on its wheels, the exhaust note bouncing off the garage walls. Dylan was grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. "That's so cool!" Nathan let it idle for 10 minutes, watching gauges, listening for problems. The oil pressure came up solid. The temperature stayed stable. No weird noises, no smoke, nothing that screamed impending disaster. "We did it," Luke said, and there was relief in his voice. "The hard part's done." But Nathan knew better. The hard part was just beginning. Paint preparation took another month. Every surface had to be perfect because the Pantera's low aggressive bodywork would show every flaw. They block sanded the entire car by hand, working through progressively finer grits until the primer felt like skin. Nathan hired a professional painter for this one, a guy named Tony who'd been doing high-end automotive work for 30 years. Tony charged $8,000 just for the color coats, but Nathan had learned his lesson. Some things you didn't cheap out on. The original color was bright orange, but Nathan made a decision that kept him up at night. He changed it to deep blue metallic, a modern color that would make the car stand out at auction. It was a gamble. Purists might hate the non-original color, but Nathan believed it would photograph better, draw more attention, command a higher price. "You're sure about this?" Luke asked the night before Tony was scheduled to spray. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." The paint went on over 3 days. Base coat, clear coat, wet sanding between stages. When Tony finally pulled off the masking tape and buffed the final clear, the Pantera looked like liquid sapphire. Deep and rich, the metallic flake catching light in ways that made the car seem alive. "That's not a car," Dylan said, seeing it for the first time fully painted. "That's art." He wasn't wrong. The Pantera had transformed from a rusted hulk into something that belonged in a museum. The low wedge shape, the wide rear haunches, the pop-up headlights, all of it came together in a way that was almost aggressive in its beauty. The interior took 2 more months. Nathan had wanted to do it himself to save money, but Luke talked him out of it. "You're this close to perfect. Don't screw it up trying to save 10 grand on upholstery you don't know how to do." So Nathan hired a specialist, a woman named Rita who did interiors for show cars. She charged $28,000 and took 2 months, but when she was done, the Pantera's cabin looked like something from a luxury car showroom. Black leather, perfect stitching, every panel fitted exactly right. The total bill kept climbing. $160,000 became $170. $170 became $185. Nathan stopped sleeping well, lying awake doing math, calculating best-case scenarios and worst-case disasters. The car was finished in late March, 2 years and 7 months after they'd started. Nathan organized a small unveiling at the garage, inviting customers and local car people. Maybe 30 people showed up, and when he pulled the cover off the completed Pantera, the room went silent. Then someone started clapping, and everyone joined in. Robert Chen was there, the broker who'd bought the first Mustang. He walked around the Pantera twice, not touching, just looking. Finally, he pulled Nathan aside. "This is extraordinary work." "Thank you." "I'm serious. This is best-in-class restoration. You could show this car at Pebble Beach." "I'm planning to auction it, build some publicity for the shop." "Smart. Where?" "I was thinking local. Detroit has a classic car auction in May." Robert shook his head. "Think bigger. There's a major collector auction in Phoenix in 2 months. High-end stuff, serious buyers. This car would fit right in." "How much does it cost to enter?" "Entry fee is around $3 grand, but the exposure is worth it. You get featured in their catalog, online listings, usually some media coverage. And the buyers there have real money. You could see bidding go north of $250, maybe $300,000 for something this clean." Nathan felt his pulse quicken. 300,000 would mean a profit of over 100 grand after expenses. It would validate everything: the risk, the work, the obsessive pursuit of perfection. "I'll look into it." "Do more than look. This is your moment, Nathan. Don't waste it on a small-time local auction." After everyone left, Nathan sat in the Pantera's driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, and just existed in the space for a while. The leather smelled new. The gauges glowed softly. Everything was exactly as it should be. Luke knocked on the window. "You good?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About Phoenix?" "About all of it. About how this started with a collapsing garage and 8 forgotten cars. About how I almost gave up 100 times. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Nathan climbed out of the car and stood looking at it. Let's do Phoenix. Go big. The auction company accepted the Pantera immediately. They loved the story. Mechanic buys abandoned garage, finds forgotten exotic, spends 3 years bringing it back to perfection. It was exactly the kind of narrative that made good auction copy. They scheduled professional photography, brought in a writer to document the restoration process, featured the car prominently in their catalog. Nathan paid the entry fee and the transportation costs and tried not to think about how much money was riding on this single event. The auction was scheduled for a Saturday in late May. Nathan and Luke drove the Pantera to Phoenix on a trailer, not trusting it for a 2,000-mile road trip despite all their work. Dylan came along, missing a week of school because Nathan wanted him there for this. They arrived 2 days early for inspection and staging. The auction house had a warehouse where all the vehicles were displayed, and walking through it was like touring a museum. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, classic muscle cars worth 7 figures, and there, in the middle of it all, was Nathan's Pantera. You belong here, Luke said quietly. The car, I mean, but also you. You earned this. The auction started Friday evening with lower-tier vehicles. Nathan watched from the audience, studying how it worked. The auctioneer's rhythm, the way bidders signaled, the tension that built as prices climbed. He felt sick to his stomach thinking about standing up there tomorrow. Saturday morning, Nathan woke up at 5 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep. He went for a walk around the hotel, then grabbed coffee and stared at his phone until Luke and Dylan came down for breakfast. You look terrible, Luke said. Thanks. I mean, you look nervous. It's understandable. What if nobody bids? Then we take it home and sell it privately. But Nathan, that's not going to happen. That car is perfect. Someone's going to want it. The Pantera was scheduled for 2 p.m., middle of the afternoon session when the serious buyers were warmed up but not tired yet. Nathan spent the morning pacing, checking his phone, and generally making himself crazy. At 1:30, they moved the car into staging. Nathan gave it one final look, checking for any imperfection that might have appeared during transport. There were none. The car was flawless. Dylan hugged him. Good luck, Dad. Thanks, buddy. Whatever happens, this is really cool, like the coolest thing you've ever done. Nathan felt his throat tighten. I love you, kid. Love you too. Now go sell a car. At 2 p.m., the Pantera rolled onto the auction stage under bright lights. The auctioneer gave the provenance. 1971 De Tomaso Pantera, pre-L model, complete rotisserie restoration, fully documented, shown in catalog feature. Then he opened bidding at $75,000. A paddle went up immediately. Then another. The price climbed fast. $85,000, $95,000, $110,000. Nathan stood at the side of the stage, barely breathing. Luke was beside him, gripping his shoulder. The bidding slowed at $125,000, and Nathan felt his heart sink. Still a profit, but not the validation he'd hoped for. Then a new bidder entered, someone on the phone with the auction house. The price jumped to $140,000. Another bidder countered, $150,000. Phone bidder, $160,000. The in-person bidder thought about it, then raised their paddle, $170,000. The room was completely silent except for the auctioneer's voice, rhythmic and practiced. Nathan couldn't tell if the phone bidder was still active. The seconds stretched out like hours. Finally, the voice on the other end of the phone line said something to the auction house representative, who nodded and raised the bid card. $180,000, the auctioneer called. The in-person bidder shook their head. Done. The auctioneer looked around the room. $180,000 going once, going twice. He paused, scanning for any last movement. Sold for $180,000. The gavel cracked down like thunder, and the room burst into applause. Nathan just stood there, stunned. $180,000. After all expenses, after paying back Luke's investments, after everything, he'd cleared maybe $25,000 in profit. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that he'd done it. He'd taken a rusted-out exotic that most people would have scrapped and turned it into something that commanded nearly $200,000 at auction. Luke was laughing and shaking him. We did it! We actually pulled it off! Dylan ran over and hugged Nathan hard. That was amazing! Did you see how many people were bidding? Nathan hugged his son back, and for the first time in 2.5 years, he felt like he could breathe properly. The buyer turned out to be a collector from California who owned several Panteras and wanted this one for the quality of the restoration. He met Nathan after the auction, a trim man in his 60s with gray hair and an expensive watch. "Exceptional work," the man said, shaking Nathan's hand. "I've been collecting these cars for 20 years, and this is one of the finest examples I've seen. The attention to detail is remarkable." "Thank you. It was a labor of love." "I could tell. That kind of work doesn't happen unless someone cares deeply." The man handed Nathan a business card. "If you ever want to work on another Pantera, I have 2 that need restoration. Full budget, no shortcuts. I'd pay you well." Nathan pocketed the card. "I'll think about it." After the man left, Nathan walked back to the Pantera one last time. His phone was already blowing up with messages. The auction house wanted to feature him in their newsletter. A classic car magazine wanted an interview. Robert Chen had texted congratulations and said he had 3 new customer leads. But standing there alone with the car, Nathan thought about Victoria Hale, the CEO who'd sold him that collapsing garage for $1,000 because she couldn't see past the problems to the potential underneath. He wondered if she knew what had happened, if she'd seen the articles, the auction results, the business he'd built from that property she'd considered worthless. Part of him wanted to track her down, show her what he'd accomplished, make her see what she'd missed. But a bigger part of him realized it didn't matter. She'd made her choice based on what she valued. He'd made his based on what he saw. And in the end, vision mattered more than arrogance. Nathan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Mercer?" A woman's voice, professional. "This is Victoria Hale. I'm not sure if you remember me." Nathan's heart stopped. "I remember. I saw the auction results, the Pantera, and I did some research on your company. I wanted to call and say, well, congratulations. What you've built is remarkable." He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Victoria continued, her voice quieter now. "I also wanted to apologize for how I treated you that day, for not seeing what you saw. I've thought about that garage many times over the past few years, and I realize I made a significant error in judgment." "You saw a problem," Nathan said finally. "I saw an opportunity. We were looking at the same thing but seeing it differently. That's generous of you, more generous than I deserve." She paused. "Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I'd like to hear about your process, how you knew that property had value when everyone else saw a liability." Nathan looked at the Pantera, gleaming under the warehouse lights, at Luke and Dylan talking nearby, at the business card in his hand from a collector willing to pay for his expertise. "Yeah," he said, "I think I could do that." They met 3 weeks later at a coffee shop in downtown Detroit, one of those places with exposed brick and expensive espresso machines that hissed like angry cats. Nathan arrived first, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that Dylan had insisted looked professional. He felt out of place among the laptops and business suits, but he ordered a black coffee and sat down anyway. Victoria walked in exactly on time. She looked different than he remembered, older maybe, or just tired. The sharp edges were still there, but something about her seemed less certain. She ordered something complicated with oat milk and sat down across from him. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "You sounded like you actually wanted to talk, not just apologize and disappear." "I do want to talk." She wrapped her hands around her cup, not drinking yet. "I've been following what you've done with that property, the articles, the auction results. It's impressive. It almost killed me a few times. But you kept going. Didn't have much choice. I'd bet everything on it." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's what I don't understand. How did you know? When you looked at that garage that morning, what did you see that I completely missed?" Nathan thought about how to answer that. He could give her the simple version, saw the cars, recognized their value, did the math. But that wasn't really true. The math had come later. What he'd seen first was something else entirely. "My dad ran an auto repair shop," Nathan said. "Nothing fancy, small place on the east side. He taught me that most people judge things by their surface condition. They see rust and assume worthless, see damage and assume unfixable. But he always said the real skill was looking past the obvious problems to see what was actually there." "So you saw the cars?" "I saw the building first, actually. The foundation was solid. The location was good, close to those development zones the city had been talking about. Then I saw the cars, and yeah, that changed everything. But even without them, that property had value. You just had to be willing to look for it. Victoria was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. I was so focused on the problems, the environmental issues, the structural damage, the timeline delays. All I could see was how it was blocking my project. That's not unreasonable. You had a goal and it was in the way. But I was arrogant about it. I remember my executives laughing when you said you wanted to inspect the building. We thought you were crazy for even considering buying it. I probably was crazy. My sister definitely thought so. Were you scared? Victoria asked. When you signed those papers, were you terrified you'd made a massive mistake? Nathan almost laughed. Terrified doesn't cover it. I had $800 left after buying that place, a kid to raise alone, no backup plan. Yeah, I was scared every single day for about 2 years. But you didn't quit. Couldn't afford to. I'd already burned the boats, Only way out was through. Victoria took a sip of her coffee, finally. I quit. The admission hung there between them. Nathan waited. After that garage sale, the development project fell apart anyway, she continued. Financing issues, partnership problems, the usual corporate disasters. But I kept thinking about you, about how you'd seen opportunity where I'd seen obstacles. It bothered me more than the failed project did. Why? Because I built my whole career on being the smartest person in the room, on seeing things others missed, on making deals that worked when people said they wouldn't, and then you showed up and saw something I was literally trying to give away, and you turned it into this. She gestured vaguely, meaning the business, the success, all of it. It made me question whether I'd been missing opportunities my whole life because I was too focused on the obvious plays. Nathan understood that feeling, the doubt that crept in when you realized your worldview might be incomplete. So what did you do? I started looking differently, at properties, at deals, at problems, trying to see them the way you must have seen that garage, looking for hidden value instead of just obvious returns. Did it work? Victoria smiled, but it was complicated. Sometimes. Other times I just found genuinely worthless properties and lost money on my new optimism. Turns out not every garage has 8 classic cars hiding inside. That made Nathan laugh. Yeah, I got pretty lucky with that part. It wasn't luck, or not just luck. You recognized what those cars were. You knew how to restore them. You had skills I'll never have. And you have skills I'll never have. Running a corporation, managing big projects, navigating that whole world. We're just good at different things. Are we, though? Victoria leaned forward slightly. Because I've been wondering if the real difference isn't skills. It's perspective. You saw potential, I saw problems. Same property, completely different interpretations. Nathan thought about that while he drank his coffee. About all the times over the past few years when other people had told him something was impossible, and he'd done it anyway. The Mustang restoration on no budget. The Pantera build that took 3 years and nearly 200 grand. Even simple things, like getting Dylan to school on time while working nights, or keeping the business running when customer payments were late. Maybe it's both, he said finally. Skills matter, but yeah, how you look at things matters too. I had to believe that garage was worth saving, or I never would have put in the work to actually save it. Do you ever doubt yourself, even now with everything you've accomplished? All the time. Every new project, I wonder if this is the one that's going to fail, if I'm going to run out of money, or skill, or luck. The doubt never really goes away. Then how do you keep going? Nathan looked out the window at the Detroit street. People walking past, cars driving by, the whole city moving around them. Because the alternative is staying stuck, staying safe. And I did that for a while after my wife died. Worked small jobs, kept my head down, tried not to want anything because wanting things felt dangerous. But that's not living. That's just existing. Victoria didn't say anything, but Nathan could see something shift in her expression. Recognition, maybe. The garage scared the hell out of me, he continued, but it also made me feel alive again, like I was building towards something instead of just surviving. And once you feel that, it's hard to go back to safe. They talked for another hour. About business, about risk, about the strange paths that led people to where they ended up. Victoria told him about growing up in a family that valued achievement above everything, about building her company in her 20s because she was trying to prove something to a father who'd never thought she could. Nathan told her about raising Dylan alone, about the guilt of those early years when he'd been physically present but mentally absent, chasing this impossible dream. Does he forgive you? Victoria asked. Your son, for the time you missed. I don't know if there's anything to forgive. He seems okay, happy even. But I wonder sometimes if I damage something by being so obsessed with the business, if he'll realize it later and resent me for it. You were building something for both of you, though, a future. Doesn't that count? Maybe. Or maybe I was just chasing my own ambition and telling myself it was for him. Nathan finished his coffee. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I did it for both of us, but also for me, because I needed to prove I could. Prove it to who? Everyone. Myself. My dad, even though he's gone. The world in general, I guess. He smiled slightly. Probably prove it to you too, if I'm being honest. The CEO who laughed at me for buying a worthless garage. Victoria winced. I earned that. But for what it's worth, you proved it. Thoroughly. When they finally left the coffee shop, Victoria paused on the sidewalk. Can I ask you one more question? Sure. If you had to do it over again, knowing how hard it would be, how much it would cost, all the struggles, would you still buy that garage? Nathan didn't even have to think about it. In a heartbeat. Why? Because it changed everything. Not just financially, though that matters, but it changed how I see myself, what I think I'm capable of. Before that garage, I was a guy working towing shifts and barely keeping his head above water. Now I run a business people respect. I build things that matter. I'm a different person than I was 3 years ago. Victoria nodded. Thank you. For meeting me. For being honest. Thank you for calling. Most people don't apologize when they're wrong. Most people aren't confronted with their mistakes in quite such a public way. She smiled. Good luck with your next project, Nathan. Whatever it is. They shook hands and went their separate ways. Nathan walked back to his truck, a newer one now, not the rusty Silverado from 3 years ago, and sat there for a minute thinking about that conversation. About how strange it was that the person who'd sold him that garage for $1,000 had become, in some weird way, part of his origin story. The antagonist who wasn't really an antagonist, just someone who'd looked at the same situation and seen it differently. His phone rang. Luke. Where are you? We've got a customer coming in 20 minutes to look at the Chevelle. On my way. Be there in 10. Nathan drove through Detroit thinking about the city, about how much of it looked like that garage had looked 3 years ago, abandoned, broken, written off by people who couldn't see past the damage. But also about how much potential was still there, waiting for someone willing to look for it. Mercer Restoration and AutoWorks had grown beyond anything Nathan had imagined. The original garage now had a proper sign, a paved parking lot, and a second building they'd acquired last year for overflow work. They employed 8 people full-time and had a 6-month waiting list for restoration projects. The business was stable, profitable, real. But Nathan's favorite part was still the work itself. The problem-solving, the craftsmanship, the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. He'd turned down 3 offers to expand into multiple locations because he didn't want to lose that hands-on connection to the cars. Dylan, now 12, spent most afternoons at the shop doing homework in the office or helping Luke with basic tasks. He'd developed a good eye for detail and could spot body imperfections Nathan sometimes missed. Last month he'd found a stress crack in a Camaro's subframe that would have caused major problems if they'd missed it. You thinking about following in my footsteps? Nathan had asked him after. Dylan shrugged in that way 12-year-olds did. Maybe. Or maybe I'll do something completely different. But this is pretty cool. Fixing things, making them better than they were. That's a good thing to do with your life. That conversation had stuck with Nathan. Making things better than they were. That was the work, wasn't it? Not just with cars, but with everything. With businesses, with relationships, with yourself. The customer looking at the Chevelle turned out to be a young woman, maybe 25, who'd inherited the car from her grandfather. It needed a complete restoration, but she didn't have anywhere near the money for it. Nathan could see her heart breaking as Luke explained what it would cost. What if we did it in phases, Nathan suggested. Get the mechanical stuff sorted first so it's safe and drivable. Then you save up and we do the body work. Then the interior, spread it out over a couple years. Her eyes lit up. You can do that? I thought it had to be all at once. We can do whatever works for you. The car's been sitting for 20 years. Another couple won't hurt it. After she left, excited now instead of dejected, Luke gave Nathan a look. You know we lose money doing it that way. Inefficient to keep stopping and starting. Probably. But she gets to keep her grandfather's car. That's worth something. You're getting soft. Maybe. Or maybe I remember what it felt like to not have enough money and need someone to take a chance on me. Luke didn't argue with that. That evening, Nathan locked up the shop and drove home. The house was bigger now. 3 bedrooms, actual furniture, a yard where Dylan practiced baseball. Amy came over for dinner once a week, and she'd stopped looking worried every time Nathan talked about the business. The stress lines around her eyes had faded. Dylan was in the kitchen when Nathan got home, making spaghetti with more confidence than any 12-year-old should have. He'd learned to cook over the past year out of necessity. Nathan's skills began and ended with sandwiches, and had gotten genuinely good at it. How was the coffee thing with that CEO lady? Dylan asked, stirring sauce. Interesting. She wanted to know how I knew the garage was worth buying. What'd you tell her? That I looked past the obvious problems and saw what was actually there. Dylan thought about that while he cooked. Is that what you do with cars too? Look past the rust and see what they used to be? Kind of. But it's more like seeing what they could be. The rust is real, the damage is real, but underneath that, there's still a car that wants to run. It just needs someone willing to do the work to get it there. That's sort of how you are with people too. Nathan paused, surprised. What do you mean? Like with me. After Mom died, I was kind of a mess. Didn't talk much, didn't want to do anything. But you never gave up on me. You kept trying to get me interested in stuff, kept bringing me to the garage, kept acting like I was going to be okay, even when I didn't feel okay. Nathan's throat went tight. You were always going to be okay, buddy. You're strong. You just needed time. Yeah, but you believed it before I did. That's the same thing, right? Seeing what could be instead of just what is. They ate dinner together at the kitchen table, talking about school and baseball and a video game Dylan wanted. Normal things, easy things. But Nathan kept thinking about what his son had said, about seeing potential instead of just current reality, about believing in possibilities that weren't visible yet. After dinner, Nathan drove back to the garage alone. He did this sometimes, late at night when everyone was gone. Just walked through the space, checking on projects, thinking. He stopped in front of the far wall, the one section of original concrete he'd never repaired or painted over. It still had rust stains, still showed water damage from the years before he'd fixed the roof. Luke had wanted to refinish it a dozen times, but Nathan always said no. He kept it there as a reminder of where everything started, of how far they'd come, of the fact that valuable things rarely looked valuable at first glance. His phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Mercer, this is David Chen, Robert's son. My father passed away last month and left me his Pantera collection. I'd like to hire you to maintain them. Please call me when you can. Nathan stared at the message for a long moment. The collector who'd bought his Pantera at auction had died, and his son wanted Nathan to care for the cars. It felt like some kind of circle completing. He typed back, I'm sorry for your loss. I'd be honored to help with the collection. I'll call you tomorrow. Then he pocketed his phone and looked around the garage one more time, at the lifts and the tools and the projects in various states of completion, at the business he'd built from nothing, at the life he'd constructed from the ruins of that freezing morning 3 years ago when he'd signed papers for a property everyone else thought was worthless. The world was full of people who looked at broken things and saw garbage, who saw obstacles and stopped trying, who let fear or practicality or common sense talk them out of pursuing things that seemed impossible. But there were also people who looked deeper, who saw potential where others saw problems, who were willing to bet everything on a vision nobody else shared. Nathan had learned that the difference between those two types of people wasn't talent or resources or even luck. It was simpler than that. It was just the willingness to believe that beneath the rust and damage and obvious problems, there might be something worth saving, something that could be made beautiful again if someone cared enough to do the work. He thought about Victoria, spending years questioning herself because she'd missed what he'd seen. But the truth was, they'd both been right in their own ways. She'd seen the logical choice, dump the problem, move on, stay efficient. He'd seen the unlikely possibility, take the risk, do the work, maybe create something extraordinary. Neither approach was wrong, they were just different. And the world needed both kinds of people. Needed the pragmatists who kept things running smoothly, and needed the dreamers who looked at worthless garages and saw empires waiting to be built. Nathan turned off the lights and locked up. Tomorrow there would be more work, more cars to restore, more customers to help, more problems to solve. The work never really ended, and that was fine. He'd learned to love the work itself, not just the results it produced. Driving home through the Detroit night, Nathan thought about his dad, about Frank Mercer, who'd taught a teenage kid that patient hands could fix almost anything, who'd shown him that value wasn't always obvious, that you had to look for it, who'd died too young but left behind lessons that had built a business and changed a life. "Thanks, Dad," Nathan said quietly to the empty truck, "for teaching me to look deeper, for showing me that broken things aren't worthless things, for everything." The city lights blurred past. Somewhere out there, other people were probably looking at their own versions of that collapsing garage, seeing their own impossible projects, deciding whether to walk away or take the risk. Nathan hoped at least some of them would take the risk, would sign the papers and do the work and discover what was hiding beneath the rust, because the world needed more people willing to believe in unlikely possibilities. More people who understood that the distance between worthless and valuable was usually just vision, work, and the stubborn refusal to give up. He pulled into his driveway and sat there for a moment looking at his house, his home, the life he'd built. None of it would exist if he'd listened to the reasonable voices telling him that garage was a disaster, if he'd let fear or practicality or common sense stop him from seeing what could be. Dylan was at the window, probably waiting to make sure Nathan got home safe. He waved, and Nathan waved back. Then he got out of the truck and went inside, already thinking about tomorrow's work, about the Chevelle that needed a transmission rebuild, about the customer's grandfather's car that they'd restore in phases, about David Chen's Pantera collection that would need expert care, about all the broken things still waiting to be made whole again. And somewhere across the city, in an office building Nathan had never seen, Victoria Hale was probably looking at a property report or a development proposal, trying to see past the obvious problems to the potential underneath. Trying to learn the skill Nathan had been practicing his whole life without realizing it was a skill at all. The skill of looking at broken things and seeing not what they were, but what they could become. That was the work. That was the lesson. That was everything. And on one freezing morning 3 years ago, that simple skill had changed Nathan Mercer's life forever.